One of the alarming aspects of that is that, of course, those marches here in this country, in Australia, right around the world, the protests on the university campuses and so forth, there were many people there who would regard themselves as progressives. They're not Islamic. They don't have Arabic backgrounds. They are Westerners who hate the West and are making common cause with terrorists, describing brutal activities by terrorists as resistance rather than barbarity. And so it highlights for us, it should be a real warning shot, that there are a lot of people in our own midst who will make common cause with others who loathe us, even though instinctively those two groupings don't get on.
But well, no, they do get on because they both loathe us.
Yes, that's the point.
They get on beautifully because the people on the left who've been taught to hate their own society and the terrorists, sympathizers, they all hate the West. And they all hate the values that we have. So why wouldn't they make common cause? It makes perfect sense.
In the short term.
In the short term.
Because many of those people who hate the West that are travelling at the moment would be seen by, with those terrorists, would be seen by the terrorists as useful idiots.
Oh yeah, but of course, but they never, the useful idiots are called useful idiots because they're idiots.
For a reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they're idiots and they don't see that or think about it. Because they're more interested in the feelings that they have than the reality that they're dealing with.
See, it's another one of those inversions that you were talking about. That's what it is.
Of course, complete inversion. But it's quite logical, which is why ultimately we have to say what I just said, which is what I'm planning to say at ARC. Our civilization is very special. It's very, very good in compared to every other civilization available. We got to be, every human being is, I think, is a kind of, ideally the right balance between pride and shame, right? There's certain things that you have a pride about, and pride is, a sin in Christianity, and for a good reason. But also we're all should be able to be proud of certain things that we've done and feel like, I did that, that was good, yeah. And also there's shame. There's things that I've done and you've done and every human being alive in human history has done that they're ashamed of, right? It's about having the right balance between the two. I don't want our society to be blind to its errors. I don't want what, increasingly is happening in Russia, where you're only allowed one version of history. No, I think our leaders from the past should be capable of being criticized. I do. But that has to be factually based. It has to be based on the reality and
balanced.
And balanced. And it's just, what's true for a human being is true for a society. We have to have the right balance. And I think we have to teach our children and remind ourselves that we are right to be proud, pleased with, happy about, have a sense of affinity for the place in which we live and the lineage from which we come, whether that's culturally or genetically or whatever. That's fine. It's good to be to have a sense of confidence. And I remember it's funny that this has to be explained. Like I have lots of friends in Ukraine, for example, who, if you say to them, if you ask them about where they're from, they will tell you the city that they're from, and then they will tell you how proud they are to be from that city. They will say, we have a Philharmonic orchestra there, and we have this beautiful church. They speak about the place in which they live with a sense of pride. It's not because they hate everyone else. They just have a passion for the place in which they live, and inculcating that in ourselves and in our children, I think is very important. And in the way that applies to your local town, that should also apply to your country.
Well, because it was a fellow Russian, it was Solzhenitsyn, who had that famous line about the dividing line between good and evil, not being between one human being and another, not between black and white or man and woman, or Catholic and Baptist or atheist or Hindu, but somewhere across every human heart. Then you're making the obvious point. Societies are the same. We ought to learn from the things we've got wrong, the things that we're ashamed of, but we ought to take a right pride. It's not a personal pride that puffs up me because I'm somehow clever, that I come from a culture that did this or the other, this, that or the other, but it's a pride that says these things are good, they produce good outcomes for people. We set the slaves free, whatever, should, maybe never have had them in the first place. Incidentally, I didn't know this until recently. It was the Old Testament Jews who were the first people who said slavery's wrong and didn't keep slaves. as I understand it.
Well, coming back to the other point that you were making, I think it's really important to say this. People confuse being proud of being from a place with attempting to personalize it to yourself. But I don't look at it that way. I think at a cultural level, you know, in primitive human societies, they discovered fire. And then there were people whose job it was to keep the fire and to pass the skill of keeping the fire down to other people. That's what our culture is, right? That's what a culture and a civilization is. It's a set of ideas about how to live life and how to do things that we pass down to the next generation. Now, if you think that fire is evil, you are unlikely to pass down the process of making it and the fire itself to the next generation. So we can't think, fire's hot, but it's not evil, right? It has other properties. It's useful for cooking. It's useful for all sorts of other things. So we've got to have a sensible balance, and our civilization is worth passing on, and the way to pass it on is to remind people that it's worth passing on. I think that's incredibly uncomplicated.
But it's not happening in the West.
No.
One of the reasons it's not happening, of course, is that most of these histories begin with family history, and so much of it's broken and shattered now, which is extraordinary. And another reason is that our education system really fails appallingly in this. And I actually think one of the problems we have with mental health amongst young people is that they're not given a sense of place. They're not given a sense of pride in the things that we've got right, a sense of appreciation that we're actually fortunate. We have much to be thankful for, that we stand on the shoulders of giants. We don't want to be pygmies and have the next generation of kids cursing us for undermining and smashing even their inheritance.
Well said.
Well, into all of this now, we've got the most extraordinary disruptor. Now, we all know who we're talking about. I admire the American people. And the first thing I'd want to say is be careful before we rush to judgment. If you don't like Trump, and there are a lot of people who don't in the West, because apart from anything else, they didn't see him coming because our media didn't explain, by and large, what was really happening in America. I think it's important to remember it's a very vibrant democracy where people, by and large, do take their freedom seriously. I don't think the American people made a flippant choice. I think we need to understand that to some extent, the very things we've been talking about, the American people, a lot of them were saying, this great country's losing its way. We're being told we're bad. We're being told we're no good. We're not being well managed. Our living standards are going down, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And no one seems to be able to get a handle on it. So we'll take a punt. We'll go for somebody who will disrupt it and give us a chance to reset things.
That's very true. And I think the reason that our media, as you say, don't understand his appeal at all is that like the way that we see Donald Trump is sort of through the prism of the like central London journalist who went to Oxbridge filter. And I'm not saying that's a bad filter. It's a filter that exists and it has validity in certain contexts. But there's also another filter, which is like the American people, a normal American person. And those two people's ideas about what the right president is not the same. It just isn't. Now, you know, they both think the other's wrong. I'm just saying, I don't, you know, when we hear things in Europe or in Australia about Donald Trump, it's always through the prism of he's uncouth. He doesn't speak in the way that a gentleman is supposed to speak. And it's true, he doesn't. But nor do most Americans, actually. Americans speak in a more direct, in a more, in some ways in a much more warm way, in a much more funny way. You know, the Americans speak in a different way. And Donald Trump is the way he is because he's American. That's a character in their world that doesn't exist in our world. So we find him very strange for that reason. I think a lot of this, John, is just like people's instinctive reaction against him. Because if you look at his policies, there's things that I disagree with him on, as you know, and we'll find out how the Ukraine situation works out. But broadly speaking, I don't look at what he's doing in government now and think, oh my God, this is awful. Quite the contrary. In terms of, you know, what Elon is doing with DOGE is incredible. I want 10 Elons in Westminster. And I think anyone in any Western country feels that the bureaucracy is way too bloated. And we got to find out, do we really want to be sending, as in the case of the United States, $3 million to a rapper in Gaza to make anti-Semitic songs? That's a waste of taxpayers' money. Kanye West would have done it for free, right? What I'm saying is, like, slimming down government and getting rid of all this unaccountable crap is a good, whether you're right-wing or a left-wing person, is just a good, right? It's a good thing to do. Now, within that, there will be things that are adversely affected that actually in the balance of things we might want to keep. Well, then some of them will come back over time. But right now is the time for a spring clean. Is that fair? You know, we've had a long time building up all these NGOs and quangos, and this person pays that person to do a study which they then cite on CNN, and then before you know it, it's on Wikipedia, and suddenly the government's paid this person 10 grand to create this opinion in reality, right? While pretending that our money is being best spent, when none of us agree with this opinion. That's not, I don't want that. So yes, I think some of the things that he's doing, I think he's using American power to advance the interests of the American people. That's what he's trying to do. It's quite a nice break from everybody else, don't you think?